Welcome and warm introduction, and I know we've got so much to get through today, we're going to get right to it with the session with this stellar lineup of people that you can see before you. I'm just going to say a word of introduction about all of them, and then I'm going to give them a minute only to set out an opening stall on the question before us, and that question is politics broken? So let me tell you who is here from right to the very far left. But on our right is Kwasi Kwarteng, who is the Conservative Member of Parliament, or was the Conservative Member of Parliament for Spelthorne and is now a candidate in that seat. Next to him is Nandy, who was the Labour Member of Parliament for Wigan and is a candidate for that seat. Me, you've heard about. Anand Menon is on my left here, and he is the Professor of European Politics and Foreign Affairs at King's College, London. And next to him, the former Director of Communications and Strategy in what we mustn't call the last Labour government because of the possible double meaning, and a campaigner on mental health issues, Alastair Campbell, and completing our panel, Eloise Todd, who set up Best for Britain along with the speaker we heard just a moment ago, Gina Miller. So that is your panel, and we are going to start from, well, we'll start with you, Kwasi.
Good.
In a minute, is politics broken?
Well, my short answer to this is yes and no. I think that elements of politics aren't working like they used to, but broadly it's a function of where you sit, what your political views are. If you're a UKIP voter who wanted to leave the EU, politics is working very well for you. You've set up what was a fringe party. They've forced a referendum. The referendum has gone your way, and you've got a prime minister who is sole mandate, her main principal aim, I suppose, is to deliver on Brexit. So for a voter like that, and there were millions of people in that category, politics is working very well. I think for people on the left, politics does look broken. I think you have, and it's not just a British problem, I think it's across Europe. Le Parti Socialiste in France, the Partij van de Arbeid in the Netherlands, suffered catastrophic defeats this year in their elections. I think the polls are suggesting that Labour will go down to a big defeat. I'm not sure whether they're true, but that's what they're saying at the moment. And I think there is a crisis on the left, largely spawned by things like globalization, immigration, and other things that I'm sure we'll talk about later in the panel.
Thank you, and admirably concise. Nandy, is politics broken, and if it is, who broke it?
Well, I don't think politics is broken. I think it's certainly true that national politics, not just the political system, but the national media as well, hasn't given a voice to a lot of people in this country for a very long time. But I also think that if the EU referendum told us anything, if we hadn't already learnt that from campaigning in the Scottish referendum, in constituencies where we've seen a dramatic rise in support for UKIP in recent years, it should have told us that people are not apathetic, they're angry. And that is a cause, in my view, for hope, because if people are angry, then that demands a response from the political system. It can be channeled and it can be worked with. Apathy is very, very hard to deal with, but anger demands a response. Will we respond to that? I genuinely don't know. I think if one thing has characterised British politics for me since June the 24th last year, it's that we collectively have spectacularly failed to grasp the implications of what people were trying to tell us on June the 24th in that referendum. I say that as much for people with Kwasi's politics as I do for people with mine. And we've got to respond to that, otherwise politics will be broken.
Thank you. Set out your stall for us, Anand Menon. Who is politics broken, and if it is, who's to blame?
Well, my heart wants me to say that, yes, politics is broken, in the same way that my heart wants me to say that football's broken because the team I support keeps getting hammered. So, you know, when the side you're on is losing, you want to say that the system is broken. But actually, I think that politics is in the process of fixing itself. Politics was broken, and the saddest thing about contemporary politics for me was the fact that there were 3 million people in this country who couldn't find anything to vote for in 2015. Who registered to vote in the referendum in 2016, many of whom just to voice their anger with the state of our politics. Politics is coalescing around a new normal now, and the saddest thing about it is it's doing it without a Labour Party. This is a time when the politics of the next decade will be shaped And we need a decent centre-left party to take part in that shaping. The fate of the Labour Party is not simply down to Corbyn. There are he is obviously a factor, but there are a whole variety of reasons for it. But at the moment, we're at a time of maximum danger. Politics is recrystallising, and it's being recrystallised by the right.
Alastair Campbell, is it broken?
No. I think the question maybe that we should work towards is whether our system of democracy is breaking. And I think that is a really profound question. And when you look at the countries that are less democratic, whether it's China, whether it's Russia, whether it's the America that Trump is trying to create, I think there may be an even bigger argument going on about what our form of democracy represents and whether not just politicians, but whether the public care enough about that to want to engage in a way that they should. But as you know, Jonathan, I do loads and loads and loads of speeches and businesses and charities and schools and colleges, and I want to do something which I do at every event I do at the moment, because I think this will help us give an answer to the question. I ask every audience these three questions, which require a show of hands. Are you optimistic or pessimistic about Brexit? Are you optimistic or pessimistic about a Trump presidency? And do you think anybody other than Theresa May is going to be Prime Minister after June the 9th? Now, hands up first.
We may not need to do that in this room, I think.
Well,
I somehow suspect, but you go ahead.
But listen, hands up, because this, I think, shows how far, if this is any representation at all, it's looking sort of maybe a little bit on the older side of the spectrum. Hands up who is optimistic about Trump. Hands up who's optimistic about Brexit.
1, 2, 3. Admirably
hands
courageous,
up,
yeah.
Hands up who thinks that anybody other than Theresa May is going to be Prime Minister after June the 8th.
Oh,
See,
okay.
Right, a few.
That's a starting point.
But that's
a base on which you can build.
That is, in my mind, catastrophic for a modern, allegedly healthy democracy.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Eloise, Todd, you're involved in setting up a new grouping, Best for Britain. Does the fact you set up something new suggest you have hope and believe politics is not broken, or did you think something was new because something was needed because politics is broken?
I think politics could break if we don't start to get young people registering to vote, exercising their democratic right, and frankly, feeling like they've got something to vote for. If we look at the last couple of years, in terms of turnout, in terms of youth engagement, all of the under 40s, and look at the massive generational divide we've got right now in terms of the way that people are voting and what they're voting for, we are at serious risk of the past voting against the future in this country. And what we really want to do is make sure that does not happen at the next election. So regardless of people's party political stances, we really want to have that energy and that drive and to make people feel like there's a point to their vote. So that's the point of the Best for Britain campaign. On whether politics more broadly is broken, picking on Alastair's point about democracy, one of the things that I've found pretty terrifying over the last year is the lack of media space. Sometimes this country feels as if we are a repressive regime. The fact that the right-wing press just dominates and closes down people and actually goes after prominent names if they speak up on these issues. Gina's an amazing case in point in terms of the abuse that's been levelled at her for being so brave at speaking out. We should remember that as a proud democracy, we all have the right to freedom of speech and we all have the right to those views. And there's the lack of freedom of speech and the lack of politics within politics, if you like, over the last 9 months, I think means that we are close to breaking point, but we are Best for Britain and we have hope and we think we've got time to turn it around. 27 days to the election, register to vote.
Okay, thank you. So lots there, and at least two of you have mentioned the media, so let's just do something very quickly on this point. Kwasi, you heard there Eloise saying that, it feels like a repressive regime, but even if you don't go that far, it is a very clearly press dominated by one particular point of view. On Brexit, it was almost unanimous. There was a chorus for leaving rather than for remaining. That surely must warp, even if it doesn't break politics.
I think this is an exaggerated point. We've always had a pretty right-wing press in this country. We've always had a right-wing press in this country. I mean, I remember 1992 when The Sun said, well, the last person to leave Britain if Labour or Kinnock gets in, turn the lights out. We've always had a loud, and you go back to the 30s and the Rothermere press and all of that. I actually think that what you say is less applicable now than then, because in 1992, the broadsheet media dominated the media in a way that in 2015 it doesn't. There are lots of outlets. If I tweet something, there are whole lots of people, Corbynistas, all sorts of people who have their own way and their own platform to speak. So I don't see the world in the way that you do, one where there's a sort of right-wing conspiracy to stifle opinion. I don't see that. Certainly not on Twitter, I don't see it on Facebook, and I don't see it in social media.
Alastair.
I mean, I think that we do have, I think one of the reasons why we've come out of or are coming, unless we all stand up and try and stop it as we should, I will carry on remoaning until the whole thing is over. But unless, I don't think it's fair to say we came out because of the right-wing media. We didn't. I think that there are lots and lots and lots of reasons, but I think what the right-wing media did do was to provide a ramp for the politics and the nature of the debate. Most of the European Union looks on at our press and thinks there is something, frankly, a bit weird about that country, that those newspapers are given so much sway to define our debate. And one of the really big complaints I have about Theresa May and the way she's governed since allegedly being a soft Remainer until June the 23rd and now being like a hard Brexiteer on steroids is that she is only driven by that agenda. And I cannot, for the life of me, through history, think of any country ever that has governed successfully by governing so clearly against the interests of young people and what they want. And so when Eloise says what young people, it's not about young people engaging to vote, it's actually about politicians now listening to what young people are saying about them feeling their futures being taken away.
Anand, you wanted to come in on just this point, yeah.
Just a couple of things. I think the role of the tabloid press over 20 years in laying the groundwork for a referendum campaign where people believe the worst was absolutely fundamental.
Yeah.
This referendum wasn't won between February and June last year. It was won since the Maastricht Treaty, where that kind of anti-European drumbeat was the background noise to our politics. But let me just say, and I suspect I won't get a clap for this, I disagree fundamentally with this notion that we need to try and stay in now. Because if we are seriously worried about the state of our politics and about the faith that people have in our political process, overturning a referendum, whatever one might think about where we are going as a result of it, strikes me as a profoundly dangerous thing to do.
Can I challenge that?
But only so briefly, because I want to bring in...
Well, I just think that if the country reaches a view that this is a catastrophic mistake, the country is allowed to take that decision.
But you're absolutely deluded. You're absolutely... Can I get back to this? I mean, it's, I mean, I hate to be... it's always a bad thing to sort of disagree with the audience, but I think people are completely deluded about this. I think for most people, the ship has sailed and they want to move on. I think this idea...
But if it's going to sink...
If I'm canvassing in my constituency, which voted 60% Leave, lots of the other Leave constituencies I go to, this notion that we're all going to suddenly wake up in the middle of the night and think, oh my God, it was a terrible mistake, let's rush back into the EU. This is complete cloud cuckoo land.
Why can we not look at the deal? It's
completely insane.
Why can you not look at the deal that is done and then be allowed to make a judgment?
You know, obviously in Westminster, you can get a roaring applause.
Because nobody's making the argument. Nobody's making the argument.
Oh, hold on, Alastair. Let's bring in Lisa. I wanted to, because something you said about the implications. We didn't grasp the implications of that vote on June the 23rd. And I wondered what you thought those implications were, and if you would set those out for us. I wondered if one of them was going to relate a bit to what Anand Menon said, which is those 3 million people who hadn't bothered voting at all in 2015. And one of the implications is there's a whole lot of people, perhaps, who are left out of the usual national conversation, who did speak on that day on June the 23rd. And the point I would just put to you is, here, of course, a huge degree of engagement, people coming out at 9 o'clock on a Friday morning to talk politics. But one of the things that really strikes me going around the country is how many people are just tuned out of it altogether. Know very little, don't follow it, don't really read the papers or watch TV. And I just wondered if that's one of the implications you were when talking about when you mentioned June 23rd.
Well, I think the implications I was talking about really are what I heard in towns like mine, in Wigan, in Sunderland, in Middlesbrough, when I was campaigning all over, mainly the north of England during the referendum, which is a group of people for whom life has got harder, less secure, much more hopeless in outlook over the last 10, 20, 30 years, who worry very much about what the future will look like, who feel that nobody is speaking for them or listening. Many of them are very socially conservative rather than socially liberal. They live in towns like mine. They care very deeply about sense of place and community and family. Not to argue that people who are very socially liberal don't, but they prioritise that much more than they prioritise the fast pace and the constant changing dynamic that you find largely in cities. And for those people, all of those changes over those last few decades have been absolutely catastrophic. They're economically driven, but they have social and political consequences, and that's what I think we're seeing through Brexit. And the problem for me with what's happened with our media debate is this, that I think it reflects what is happening with our entire political debate, is that it's become very angry, very loud, very shouty, and very, very black versus white, when the reality that I have to deal with and Kwasi has to deal with as a Member of Parliament or previous Member of Parliament every day, the issues that we deal with, the answers are so often in shades of grey. And I think actually that the truth of Brexit and what is happening in Britain at the moment is not at all reflected by the debate in the media or in politics. What I see in our political system is that, largely speaking, we are being pushed, sometimes bullied, into trying to take a black or a white position on Brexit. You're either for or against. You either want to rerun the referendum or you want to plunge us out the end with some kind of catastrophic hard Brexit. But the truth is, when I talk to people in my town and around the country, I think for most people this was a very finely balanced decision. They did want us to wake up. They did want us to start listening and acting on and responding to those very real demands and concerns around the country. But for most families who were split down the middle by Brexit, they've moved on, they've got on with it, and now they want to see us get the best deal for Britain. And I don't see that reflected anywhere in the political debate, except for when I look to the Labour Party and I see Keir Starmer trying to strike a balanced position in the middle. I have some hope that politicians will stop trying to divide the country and start thinking about how we bring ourselves back together.
Thank you. So both of you want to come in. Eloise briefly and then Alastair. Eloise first.
I think Lisa's absolutely right. It is about getting the best deal. And to Kwasi's point, you know, the ship has left the harbour, but it hasn't got a destination yet. We're supposed to be deciding, it could go anywhere. We're supposed to be deciding in the next couple of weeks, you know, who's actually driving the ship, because at the moment it's left the harbour without a driver, so who's in charge. And then the idea that we say, well, because we've decided this, because we've decided to go on this journey, we absolutely accept whatever outcome already when we haven't seen a deal yet. P.S. it hasn't even been started to be negotiated, and we don't really know who the team will be who's delivering it.
I want to bring us back to the subject of specifically whether politics is broken, because obviously all day and tomorrow there's going to be discussion of Brexit particularly. But just on the thing politics, this point I was suggesting about disengagement, people who are not in this room, who are switched off from politics. They came alive in that Brexit referendum, but generally a bit switched off. Does anybody else recognise that picture? Anna?
Let me just tell an anecdote. I've told it hundreds of times, you might have heard it before, but for me it summed up the country. I was doing a Q&A in a pub in Newcastle just before the referendum, and there was a real buzz in this country before the referendum. Everyone was talking politics in a way I'd never seen before. And so we had this session in this pub. There were about 300 people there. About halfway through, someone said, what happens to our economy if we leave? And I went into my spiel about there are all these studies. They reckon in general our economy will shrink, so our GDP will be smaller. And a woman at the back stood up and said, that's your frigging GDP, not mine. And that, for me, kind of summarised where we were as a country. That you have London, which is how these people see it, talking about how great we are, how well our economy is doing and things like this, and you have their lives, which are, frankly, a bit crap. Cost of living is going up, wages have been stagnant, and that, for me, summed up why so many people, just out of frustration, irritation, almost very little to do with the European Union, in the end just turned around and said, sod you, we've had enough.
No.
Lisa's saying no, go on.
Because actually what I found during campaigning for the referendum was it wasn't in those areas where people had nothing, where you have complete social breakdown, that people felt strongest. It was precisely in those areas where people felt that they had quite a lot left to lose. And what they've seen for a long, long time is a political system that simply doesn't speak about or respond to or value the things that they value in their lives. I'll give you one example. At the moment, we've got a devolution model that is in Greater Manchester that is promised to hand power to local people, including in my town of Wigan. But nobody knew anything about it. Until Andy Burnham got involved in the campaign, nobody had heard about it. And actually, the model is about basing power, not in London, but in Manchester, and then anchoring all those surrounding towns to the city in order to be dragged along in that metropolitan prosperity model. And in doing so, what the plan that we were handed builds all over our green open spaces. It creates huge roads going from towns into the city, and it allows those town centres to continue to be hollowed out, to lose the parks, the libraries, the shore starts, all of the things that people really, really care about. And until very recently, people saying, well, who is speaking for me? I value my sense of identity, my sense of community. I want to see these areas rebuilt, and I want to see the green belt protected, not because I'm a NIMBY and I don't care about people's housing needs, but because that green ring around communities like mine is what helps to protect that sense of community and that sense of identity, and has done for decades. And politicians, largely, when I listen to the debate on a national and regional level, just quite simply do not understand that that's what matters to people. That's not apathy, that's anger.
Yeah, but listen, I think we've got to be really careful about this thing about public anger. The reason why Donald Trump has become President of America is because he was brilliant at exploiting public anger in a totally dishonest way. The reason why we're leaving the European Union, in my view, is because Boris Johnson and Michael Gove, in particular, with the help of the right-wing media, were brilliant at exploiting this anger. There's three sides to this. There's a triangle here. You've got politics, you've got media, you've got the public. What politicians and the media, they can blame each other, and we do that lots. What you've also got to do, I think, is instead of just, you've got to challenge some of this anger. Because you can't just sort of get people to say, my life is shit and it's entirely down to you. And I think that when I look at this election now, we've got a situation, you talk about anger, I'll tell you there's going to be a lot of anger after June the 8th, when people think we've just had a general election in this country, in Britain, where we've got a hard Brexit Tory party, a Labour Party that seemingly, from this audience and virtually every other audience I've been to in the last few weeks, is viewed as largely unelectable, and millions of people feeling, what am I supposed to do in this? So it's all very well saying, we've got to go out and say to people, you have a responsibility to get involved in politics. And we've got to, that's why, for example, we should be, and we talk so much about the right-wing media, we should ignore the right-wing media for this. We should be talking about proper political education in schools. We should be moving towards compulsory voting. We should be moving towards a situation where people say, unless you get involved, we are going to lose our democracy. And stop pandering to it.
They have to have
Kwasi hasn't had a chance to get into a while.
You can't leave a vacuum and then blame somebody else.
You've only got a couple of minutes before we have
You've spoken extensively. Please do.
Go, Kwasi, come in and then we'll hear from you.
Just very briefly, I think you've got a completely skewed and false impression of what's going on. I mean, I hear all the time about northern Brexit voters, and the vast majority of people who are voting Brexit were Conservative voters or UKIP voters. And that is never addressed in this debate. That's never addressed. It's never addressed that people went in there not because they had nothing and they were angry and it was a revolt against the system.
There's some, yeah.
For many, not just some, there were millions. You know, a seat like Sevenoaks, a very prosperous seat, voted 54% leave. And those people wanted to leave for all sorts of reasons. They would have talked about sovereignty, they'd have talked about reclaiming their borders.
And they didn't talk about leaving the
people like
market.
you have been patronising them and patronising other Leave voters up and down the country for the last year, and that's one of the reasons why Labour are in the predicament they're in. A voter said to me, they think we're stupid, don't they, in my constituency? And I said, yeah, they do.
I don't think they're stupid.
They actually do think you're very stupid,
they were
and you don't understand your own
willfully and deliberately
and people
misinformed.
like you.
Okay, pause there for a second.
They were.
Thank you. In a couple of minutes, we're going to take some questions from all of you. There is a microphone here and a microphone here. If you would now, those of you who do want to ask a question, form a very orderly, stable and orderly queue behind each one of these microphones, then of course, then I will come to you with a question.
There's no point in your hands, you've got to move.
So there we are.
Move.
It's there, and I will come to you in a minute. But
movement. Building a
Eloise
movement.
has been keen to get in, so let's hear from Eloise. We'll hear from Anand, and then I'm going to take some questions. Eloise, yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the things that the Brexit vote showed us is that people clearly want a huge amount of change. And the big challenge now is, what is the best route to deliver that change? And in a sense, a lot of that change that people want to see, not only some of it isn't actually to do with some of the relationship with the EU, but the situation we're in with an extreme Brexit facing us is, that could harm the very opportunities that those people actually voted to change. So it's not about being for or against the
Especially if
referendum.
there's a Tory landslide
Right.
and they do all the other right-wing stuff they want to do.
It's
We let
about
them.
making sure that this country delivers for the people that did want to speak up and did want their voices heard. And unfortunately, we've got this dissonance between people think they voted for that change, and there's a hell of a small chance of that being delivered with the kind of extreme Brexit being peddled right now by this government.
We're now going to hear these questions, but just before we do, I'm surprised. In fact, we'll go straight to them. I am surprised so far in the discussion about is politics broken that no one has yet mentioned the electoral system. And maybe lots of hands. Now, I said that partly because I thought I would preempt many of the questions here because we've got such a long lines, we've only got 10 minutes. But let's start with, we'll take groups of 3. We'll hear from you first, sir.
Thank you all for coming and talking for us. I'd like to say that first. Speaking to the is politics broken, personally, my opinion is I don't think that British politics is broken, even if you have a almost preordained electoral victory coming. Alastair, you worked for a Prime Minister who had no trouble winning re-election several times.
Just because time is so short, I'm going to
But
ask you to come to a very
my
sharp
question. Sorry, I'm contextualizing it. My question is therefore, is the European political system actually broken, and will the European Union take the opportunity over the next 2 years to potentially reform itself so that its political system becomes less broken?
Thank you. Let's hear the question here.
It's Masato Kimura, a Japanese freelance journalist. In the 2010 general election, Gordon Brown described Julian Duffy as bigot. And in 2016 referendum, Remainer described Brexiter as ignorant and loser and, kind of bigot. And so now Labour lost the trust of voters. And in France and in Netherlands, socialists are disappearing. And so how do you think Labour can get the trust of voters?
Thank you. I got that. So about how Labour can win back people and the message of France. And well, the third question from here. We've only had men so far. Quite keen if there are women who'd like to ask questions that perhaps you put yourself to the front of the queue. I'm abusing my authority. Get yourself to the front of the queue because we'll hear from you and then in the next round we'll have some women. Yeah.
My name's Peter Hamilton. I declare an interest. I'm a member of the Green Party.
Yeah.
My question is to the media in general, is it not a shame that the thought leaders, many of whom are in the Green Party, are not here today?
So, okay. In that case, I'm going to, because it's a very discreet point about the organisation.
Well, one of your co-leaders is on any questions tonight with Diane Abbott.
Well,
okay, thank you, though. Let's hear from the woman behind you. Yeah, and then we'll bring it back to this panel.
Hi,
Yeah.
I'm from a widely Remain constituency, and one of the problems that we have is that our constituent MP won't reflect our opinions when it comes into debate in Houses of Parliament. So my question is how do we affect change and mobilise the debate out of here and into the effective spaces when the people we voted to represent us aren't doing that? How do we do
You mean
that?
because your member of... Hang on. You mean because your member of Parliament voted, did they, for Article 50?
She voted for Article 50,
Even
yes.
though you had, in the area, voted Remain?
We were a widely Remain constituency.
Thank you. We'll come to it, Kwasi. That's great. We'll just pause there. We're going to get some responses, and then I'll take some more if we've got time. We're going to try and be as quick as we can. The very first question was about European politics, whether that was broken. Will the European Union take the opportunity of the next 2 years to reform itself? Because you're a professor of European politics, a very quick answer from you.
I don't think the European can reform itself simply because you need unanimity and the 27 don't agree. But I think it is absolutely the case that the EU system contributes to that sense of broken politics in all the member states because there's that sense of a lack of control. Rightly or wrongly, Europe feels distant, Europe feels unaccountable, and there is that sense that it adds to the problems you already feel at the national level, and so it makes people's frustrations worse.
Thank you.
But listen, you've got to mention Macron here. Macron has shown that leadership's important, having a clear, strong vision is important, and that one of the things about politics at the moment, you talk about electoral system, I think it's much, much harder in our electoral system, but remember, we did have a referendum on that and we rejected change, so we have to live with our own choices, as I was saying earlier, but Macron has shown that it's possible for new political forces to emerge and to rise, and I think he will be a force for reform in Europe.
I have to say, just on that, you say it is possible for new political systems or forces to arise. Actually, under our electoral system, how on earth is that possible?
Very difficult.
Go on.
Very difficult.
Very difficult.
Very, very difficult.
But I think
something's got to give. Something has got to give.
Yeah.
But I think the time to come back to me and say what Macron has shown is when he's actually governed.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, that's
Okay.
the real
Well, that's a
concern.
statement.
Okay, to you, Lisa Nandy, the question that came from our, I think, Japanese colleague about how Labour can win back working class voters, and you remembered the Gillian Duffy moment with Gordon Brown. You've talked about the voters and in your own area and how disconnected they sometimes feel from the politics here in Westminster. How can, the question particularly was Labour, how could it reconnect?
I think it starts with having a bit of respect for people and doing a bit less talking when you go out and meet people and a bit more listening. So this is sort of what Kwasi was getting quite hot under the collar about a minute ago.
Yeah, it was.
But rightly, I think, I don't really agree with anything that you said, but I do agree with the sentiment that...
You agree with his right to be angry?
I do actually, and I think that sense of anger is shared by a lot of people who feel actually that straight after the referendum, there were a number of politicians, not just on the right of British politics, but also on the left, who came out and suggested that the people in this country who voted to leave were either too stupid to understand the question, that they'd been taken in by media lies or campaign lies. Actually, I think most people could see right through some of the things that Michael Gove and Boris Johnson were saying, but they chose to do it anyway. And that's the really difficult bit for the left. Yeah. We have to confront those questions at their hardest point, which is why was it that Nissan workers in Sunderland, who stood to lose a lot, were voting leave? And just very briefly on this lady's question, because I think this is really important. I represent a constituency that was 2/3 leave and 1/3 remain, but the truth is that I have to find a way of representing both. Whether those people voted for me or not, until last week and hopefully again on the 9th of June, I am their Member of Parliament, and I have to find a way of knitting their interests together and taking them with us wherever we're going in the future. And every Member of Parliament, every politician, everybody with a national platform should be seeking to do the same. The alternative is absolutely unthinkable.
Okay, I've only got 3 minutes left. The clock is telling me, so what I'm going to do is try and grab 3 more voices from you, and we'll have closing remarks here. So you've been waiting patiently, yeah.
Okay, I think Kwasi put his finger on something right at the beginning of this session, but I wouldn't agree with the conclusion he drew. He said that people who support UKIP won the referendum and are represented, and I feel now we have a situation where UKIP voters are represented by the government. Anybody left of UKIP really doesn't have representation, and it's very difficult in this election. And there are millions of us to the left of UKIP. What I would contrast that with is the situation in, for example, Germany, where the broad centre has massive representation. There is a much more sensible debate, and the press is more sensible.
Right. So there's not a question, it was a contribution.
It's more a statement.
That's all right,
yeah.
that's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, gentlemen, yeah.
A question I have for the panel. I mean, I have called myself, I guess, a socialist revolutionary and always have throughout my life, despite liberal democracy and all the changes. My question is, having said I think the political system is clearly broken and the West knows that, is what is to be done to quote someone that we all know who advocated drastic political change. Clearly, the system is broken. What has broken the system? Clearly, that is global capitalism. And what is the fundamental problem in facing our Western society? And it is the future of the planet. That is ultimately the fundamental problem. So what is to be done? This is beginning to me to seem to be very conventional.
We got it. Very good. Gentlemen, step forward, and we're going to hear from the woman here and you, and that's going to be it. We've got a minute and a half. Yes.
Just a question to Kwasi. What are you afraid of to ask the people again? No, to ask the people again once we know what we're doing. Okay. Why is that patronising?
Thank you. Good, concise question. Thank you. And this is the last question from you.
Just a very quick question. In all this debate in broken politics, no one has said the problem is party politics in this country. You can't have a debate. You talked about a lot about involving people to vote for locally, but what you vote for doesn't matter if the party imposes a three-line whip all the time, and if your MPs object, you call them saboteurs and you call an election.
Thank you very much. All right, thank you. I'm so sorry to people who we didn't have time to call on, but we're running out of time. We're going to do this as briefly as we can. Kwasi, very briefly, question directly to you. What are you afraid of?
Well, I'm afraid three questions were directed to
You've got to be as...
Okay, I'm not afraid of anything. I think what I said was delusional, was this idea that we would vote to go back in. I'm quite happy to have as many referenda as you like.
Okay.
I think the result would be more in favour of out. UKIP, they're not UKIP, it was a lot of Conservative votes, One of the things that hasn't been said is that David Cameron failed to carry his party in the referendum. 58% of Tory voters voted out, and that bears out in the figures, the fact that out won, and that was one of the big issues. The last thing I would say is that we haven't talked enough about first past the post. I think people were very savvy. They knew that one man, one vote, one woman, one vote operated in the referendum, and they also know that in first past the post, a lot of those votes are wasted. So I think that the electorate knew what they were doing.
And that's why they stayed away.
Yeah, I mean, if they're in a safe seat, they don't vote.
Good. So to the remaining four of you, the question we got in the first round, which was how do we mobilise the feeling that's clearly in this room out into the country? And so I deliberately wanted to put that to the people who are on the Remain side of the argument. Eloise, a brief answer, but you're in this business of trying to mobilise. What's your answer to that question? And then we'll hear briefly from the other.
It's important to mobilise and talk to people that agree with us. It's even more important to listen to people that might not. Among your friends and your family, the best conversations I've had about Brexit have been in my hometown of Hull with my family and friends that have a different view from me and voted differently. And I think we have to start having those conversations, continuing those conversations, and not assuming that people that think differently from you want different things in their lives. And having those conversations can start to mend those fences. But we shouldn't lose hope. We don't have to waste our votes. We can use our votes wisely, and that's what we're trying to do at Best for Britain.
Lisa, Nandy?
So I think the way that we move forward from where we are now is by trying to have a different political culture in our debate. So I don't think that the problem is political parties, actually. I think the problem is the political culture. And I think that the only future for Britain, the only one that looks bright to me, to be honest, is one where we try to negotiate the future and not impose it on one another.
Okay, and Anand, Menon, if you know, I know you thought the ship had sailed, but mobilising debate so it leaves rooms like this and goes into the wider country.
Well, I'd say two things. I'd say, firstly, that Remain supporters remain in a minority in terms of public opinion. The second thing I would say is that, for me, the really dangerous thing about this election is that the majority of the next parliament will almost certainly be a post-Brexit parliament, and the parties, the government in particular, are getting away without saying how they're going to deal with the fact of a shrinking economy and who will bear the pain of that. And I think they have to be pressed on that, and I think Labour needs to come up with a vision. Brexit is happening. It will make our economy smaller in the short term. We are the way to avoid another rash of horrible austerity.
Thank you. And final word to you, Alastair Campbell, about mobilising beyond rooms like this one.
Well, you'd hope that an election would be a place where you can mobilise opinion. But this is the most surreal election I've ever been involved in. It's being held for reasons which are not being stated. She had a mandate for Brexit. She didn't have that much trouble getting Article 50 through. We now have a situation where, because she's, and this is smart politics, fair enough, she's exploiting the weakness of the Labour Party to try to get a huge majority to deliver a hard Brexit and all the other crazy stuff she wants to do, like bringing back grammar schools. And we are helping her to do that. The way we will mobilise young people to get engaged, to get involved. We have to stay angry. You talk about anger, Lisi. I am incredibly angry that having spent most of my adult life getting to a position of helping the Labour Party go from being a losing organisation to being a winning organisation, that we're now going into a general election where very, very few people inside or outside the Labour Party think we have any chance of winning. Now, we all have to take some responsibility for that. We all have to take some responsibility for that, but that is unsustainable. So we've got to stay angry about the nature of our politics. Okay. We do, in my view, have to stay angry about Europe because we're making a catastrophic error, and those who believe that, I don't believe we're in the minority, by the way, should keep arguing for that. And one day, I think we will look back on this period and think that was a dreadful, hopefully, blip in our political history. Otherwise, we're on a very bad downward spiral.
Thank you. As you could see, this is a huge range of topics. It's not one topic, it's a huge range of topics. We have barely scratched the surface, but I think we have done so with some insight, I hope, and some illumination. So I'm sure you're going to just want to join me in thanking these 5 very good speakers, Eloise, Todd, Alastair, Campbell, Anand, Menon, Lisa, Nandy, and Kwasi, Kwarteng. Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Great.